Well, hey, Redemption, welcome. You can go ahead and take a seat. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Casey Jordan, and I am so honored to be with you this weekend and to be a part of this series. This has been such an important series, and I'm just honored to be a part of it. Back in May, just a couple of months ago, I went with my family, my parents, my brother, my sister-in-law, my 4-year-old niece, and 2-year-old nephew to Disney World. And Annie, my 4-year-old buddy, loves everything Disney. She is super into the Disney princesses right now. If you show up at their house on like any given Tuesday, odds are she's in a Rapunzel dress or a Cinderella dress all the time. She loves Disney. Now, a handful of years ago, I went to Disney World with a couple of friends, no kids, just us adults, and even in our 30-somethings, it was still magical. It was still amazing. And so I could not wait to experience Disney World with this sweet little girl. And she did not disappoint me. It was just amazing to watch the awe and wonder that she experienced as we walked down Main Street and caught our first glimpse of Cinderella's castle. She was beside herself with excitement when we went to a character dinner and she got to meet Minnie Mouse. She was speechless when she got her picture taken with Anna and Elsa. She just loved everything about it. She was taken by the sights and the sounds and the smells of this magical world. And as I watched Annie experience just this awe and wonder, it made me think about how, man, what she's experiencing right now is just a glimpse. It's just a taste of what those who follow Jesus will experience in heaven. This is just a little picture of that. Have you ever experienced that kind of awe and wonder? Maybe as a child, maybe as an adult, just a moment that took your breath away. We've all had those moments, but they're fleeting, aren't they? They're fleeting. They don't last. They spark something in us, and then it's gone. We didn't stay at Disney World. We came home. We returned to our normal lives. But we long for that spark to last a little longer. We long for those moments of awe and wonder. C.S. Lewis writes that if we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. We're in a series right now called Made for Eternity. We're looking at what the Bible has to say about what happens when our earthly lives are through. We were made for eternity. Now, for the last 2 weeks, we've said that here at Redemption, we are not dealing in fantasies. We're dealing in realities. And the painful reality is that so often we don't choose the world that we were made to inhabit. Last weekend, Corey talked about the terrifying reality of a place called hell, reserved for those who don't put their trust in Jesus. But this weekend, we are talking about the glorious, incredible reality of heaven, the world that we were made for. And that reality is so much better, so much more incredible than we could ever imagine. Now, here's the thing. A lot of times, churches use hell as a scare tactic. They use it as a way of guilting and shaming people into converting to the Christian faith. That happens so often. I've been a part of those churches. Maybe you've been a part too. But what I find really interesting is that I know of very few churches, if any, that look at the incredible beauty and glory of heaven and use that to inspire us to consider the claims of Jesus. But if heaven is all that the Bible says that it is, this really is an incredible and glorious reality, and it should inspire us to consider the claims of Jesus. And so today, we're going to look at that incredible beauty, that incredible reality. And along the way, we're going to dispel some of the myths that we believe so often about heaven. Now, here at Redemption, one of our goals is to recapture the joy and wonder of Christianity. You might have heard us use that language before. That's a value for us. And I'm going to try so hard today to do that because this subject is filled with joy and wonder. Now, typically, here at Redemption, we would start by opening our Bibles to the table of contents. We'd find the passage we were going to look at together and then go there. Today's going to be a little bit different. Today is going to be a far less linear message than we might be used to. We're going to be hopping around the Bible a lot. And so rather than going to the table of contents, all of the verses will be up on the screen if you want to write them down or snap a picture of them and go read them for yourselves later. But we're going to be hopping all over the place. So buckle up. This is going to be fun. Now, in order to understand what heaven is going to be like, we actually have to go all the way back to the beginning, to the book of Genesis. And in order to understand why we need to go back to the past to understand what's to come in the future, we need to dispel our first myth. And the first myth is that the earth is going to be destroyed. All right, that's the first myth that we believe. There's this common misconception among many that this physical world is just a temporary stop on our way to a spiritual one. That's a common misconception that we believe. But the Bible actually teaches otherwise. The Bible teaches otherwise. As you're reading through the creation account in Genesis 1 and 2, you'll notice something. Over and over and over again, as God creates the physical world, he declares it to be good. He declares it to be good. In fact, at the very end of Genesis chapter 1, after God has created all that is, this is what he says. He says, then God looked over all he had made, and he saw that it was very good. God declared the whole creation, this physical world and everything in it, to be very good. There's a writer by the name of Albert Walters, and he says this. He says, God doesn't make junk, and he doesn't junk what he has made. Let me say that again. God doesn't make junk, and he doesn't junk what he has made. God has no intention of destroying his good creation. Rather, he intends to restore it. That's what he intends. He intends to restore it. The Bible opens with the account of God's creation, and the Bible closes with the promise of restoration and recreation. Creation bookends the whole Bible. This creation is good. It was declared good by its creator. Very good. That's what God says. Now, let me take you to the very end of the story, to Revelation chapter 21, the second to last chapter in the Bible. Here's what it says. It says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the old heaven and the old earth had disappeared, not destroyed, restored, replaced, recreated. And the sea was also gone. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them. Now listen to this promise. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. And there will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All of these things are gone forever. And the one sitting on the throne said, look, I am making everything new. Do you hear that language of restoration and recreation? I am making everything new. And then he said to me, write this down, for what I tell you is trustworthy and true. God comes down. When Jesus returns, he intends to stay. He intends to stay. This world is our home. Contrary to what the old hymn says, we are not just passing through. This world is our home. And we'll get to enjoy it restored and recreated back to its glorious, very good condition that God always intended for it. So that brings up another myth that we need to dispel. And that is the myth that we're going to spend eternity playing harps and floating on clouds. You've probably heard this myth or seen it depicted before, right? Do you know where we got this from? Do you know where we got this concept? I couldn't believe this, but this is true. Cartoons. We got it from cartoons. I'm serious. Go back to the iconic cartoons of your childhood, and I promise you that you will come to an episode where a character dies, and that character is slapped with a halo, given a harp, and they float up to a cloud where they're plunked to spend eternity. There is no biblical basis for this concept whatsoever. And also, just as an aside, but I think an important one, I would advise that we not get our theology from Looney Tunes. On the whole, that's probably not the best place to get it. But that's where we got this mindset, this concept. But let's talk about the reality, because heaven is so often depicted as boring and monotonous, right? Like, we're going to float on clouds. We're going to be doing nothing but singing forever. It's depicted as boring and monotonous. And to be honest with you, when I hear people talk about heaven sometimes, I'm like, why would anyone want to go there? Like, that doesn't sound fun. This goes back to what I was saying about we often use hell as a scare tactic, but we don't use heaven as the inspiration that it is, because we don't understand how incredible it's going to be. We think it's boring. We think it's dull. Like, we don't really want to go there. But nothing could be further from the truth. Remember, God intends to restore his good creation. And so we can catch a glimpse of what heaven will be like by going back to the beginning, by going back to his originally good creation. So listen to what the Bible says God declared when he created us, men and women. Here's what it says. Then God said, let us make human beings in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. So God created human beings in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground." Okay, so God created us in his image. In short, what that means is that we were made to represent and reflect him to the rest of creation. His heart, his character, his values. We were made to represent and reflect God. Now, hold on to that for a moment, and let's jump ahead to Genesis chapter 2. Here's what it says. So the creations of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation. So he rested from all of his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. Now you might have noticed me emphasizing a word there. So take these two passages together. First, we were made in the image of God. We were made to represent and reflect him. And what we read in Genesis 2 is that God works. God works. So that means one way in which we represent and reflect God is through our work. Now, that might sound crazy to you, and you also might wonder what on earth that has to do with heaven. I'll get to that. But I had a friend who was utterly convinced that work of any kind was the result of Adam and Eve's sin. She wholeheartedly believed that in heaven there will be no work of any kind, only rest. But here's the thing, these passages in the Bible prove otherwise. God himself engages in meaningful and productive work. The passage that we just read says that God blessed Adam and Eve by giving them meaningful and productive work. Did you catch that? God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and reign over it." That's work. God gave them meaningful and productive work. God built a rhythm of work and rest into his good creation. Work is not a part of the fall. Work is not the result of sin. It's a way in which we represent and reflect God. Now, if you know how the story goes, after Adam and Eve sinned, you know that work came under a curse. God told Adam, your work is going to be cursed. It's going to be toilsome and frustrating. But work itself is not a result of the curse. Work is under a curse. And one day that curse will be lifted. One day that frustration and toil will be removed. Now, I don't know what you were made to do. I don't know what meaningful and productive work God has assigned to your life. I know what I was made to do. I was made to write and to teach. That is the meaningful, productive work God has assigned to me, and I often find both very frustrating. I stare at a blank page for hours with no ideas of what to write. I stumble over words that I practiced 100 times. I was made to do this, and yet I find it very frustrating. And you've probably experienced the same in your life. Eric Liddell was born to Christian missionaries in China. You've probably heard of him before. He left the mission field for a time to run the 1924 Olympics in Paris. He famously refused to run on a Sunday because he was so committed to taking a weekly day of rest in alignment with God's rhythm of work and rest that he built into creation. You've probably heard of him because they made an incredibly famous movie about him called Chariots of Fire in 1981. There's a scene in that movie that just gets me so excited about heaven. Eric's sister has returned from China, and she's trying to convince her brother to come back to the mission field. She's trying to convince him that this whole running in the Olympics thing, this is a waste of time. This is not a good use of your gifts. Like, Eric, come back. And so Eric wrestles over this. He's trying to decide what to do. And I love what he says to his sister. This is what he says. "I believe God made me for a purpose, for China. But he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. It's not just fun. To win is to honor him. In other words, to do what he created me to do with excellence is to honor him. It's to honor him. I know what God has given me to do in my life. I often find it frustrating. But I've also felt his pleasure. I've also experienced these moments of joy and satisfaction in doing what I know I was created to do. And if that's a taste of heaven, I want more of that. God has meaningful and productive work for you right now, and he's going to have it into the future. We will not be bored. We will not be bored. Tell me you don't want that. Tell me those moments in your life where you've experienced the joy and satisfaction of doing what you were made to do. Tell me you don't want that for eternity. Tell me you don't want to be engaged in that sort of work forever. They're some of the best moments in life. We will not be bored. Tim Keller puts it this way: there will be work in the paradise of the future just like there was in the paradise of the past, because God himself takes joy in his work. In that paradise, listen to this, you will be useful in the lives of others to infinite degrees of joy and satisfaction. You will perform with all the skill you can imagine. Have you ever noticed this? The story of the Bible begins in a garden and it ends in a city. God has invited us to participate in his creation. He's given us meaningful and productive work to do now in this creation, and he's going to have meaningful and productive work for us to do in the new creation. I wish I could tell you more about what that's going to be like. I can't. I wish that I could. What I do know is that everything that we were intended to experience in the garden is what we will experience when God comes and restores and recreates all things. That's the promise. We will not be bored. I don't know about you, but I can't wait for that day. I'm longing for that day. I'm not wishing my life away or anything, but if he takes me tomorrow, I'm good. I'm good. I look forward to that day. So, we've addressed that this world is our home, that God does not intend to destroy his creation, but to restore his good creation. And we've talked about how in heaven we're not going to be bored. We're going to have meaningful and productive work to do. I don't know exactly what that work is, but I know it's going to be there for us. So now that raises another question for us. If God intends to restore his originally good creation, and he intends to give us meaningful and productive work to do, what does that mean for our physical bodies? And that brings us to another myth. And that myth is that we will exist forever as disembodied spirits. Now, I think one of the reasons that we have a hard time fathoming heaven, sometimes anyways, is because we can't imagine a disembodied existence. We are embodied creatures, right? Like we are decidedly physical creatures, and we can't imagine what a disembodied, fully spiritual experience would be like. And that's fine, because that's not what we're going to experience. That's not what God has in store for us in heaven, at least not in the long term. So stay with me here on this for just a minute, because we have to kind of get into the weeds a little bit. If you die before Jesus returns, where you go is not where you will stay. Okay, let me say that again. If you die before Jesus returns, where you go is not where you will stay. See, the resurrection of Jesus is not only evidence of his victory over sin, it is a promise that you and I will one day experience resurrection ourselves. All those who believe in him. All those who believe in him. But that resurrection will not happen until Jesus returns. So think of it this way. Rather than there being one movement from life on earth to life in heaven, there's really two movements. From life on earth to a temporary resting place to life in heaven. So instead of one movement, there are two movements. There's a temporary halt in our journey. And I wish I could tell you more about what this temporary halt is like. The Bible really doesn't tell us a whole lot about it, but it tells us a couple of things. I want to take you to just two passages that give us a little glimpse into what that halt is going to be like for those who follow Jesus. The first happened while Jesus was dying on the cross. As Jesus died on the cross, he was surrounded by other criminals who were being crucified for their sins. He didn't die alone. He died surrounded by other people who had been convicted of crimes. And at one point, as Jesus is dying, the man being crucified next to him turns to him and says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. In that moment, this dying criminal placed his faith in Jesus. And here's what Jesus said. Jesus said, I assure you, today you will be with me in paradise. You'll be with me in paradise. So Jesus was promising that this repentant man would wake up in the presence of God. He would not yet have a resurrected body. He would not yet be at his final resting place. But he would wake up in the presence of God, totally free from all of his guilt, totally free from all of his shame, totally free from the unbearable burden of sin that he carried with him his entire life. He would be free to enjoy a restored relationship with his Creator. That's what Jesus promised. Now let me take you to another passage. Paul is hands down the greatest Christian missionary who ever lived. And he wrote to the church at Philippi of his longing to go be with Jesus. And here's what he said to the Philippians. For me, living means living for Christ, and dying is even better. But if I live, I can do more fruitful work for Christ. So I really don't know which is better. I'm torn between two desires. I long to go and be with Christ, which would be far better for me. But for your sakes, it's better that I continue to live. If you trust and follow Jesus, when you die, whether it's before he returns or you get to be a part of that glorious experience, when you die, you get to go be with him. Maybe it's a temporary halt, but you get to be with him in his presence. Now, I want to be clear on this. The Bible does not teach the doctrine of purgatory. Corey already addressed this earlier in the series, but I want to come back to it again, because what I don't want you to hear is that this temporary halt, this in-between place, is one in which we do penance for our sins. That's not what this is. When Jesus died on the cross, he said, "It is finished." And what he meant by that is, it is finished. It is finished. There is nothing more to be done. There is nothing that you contribute. So stop your striving. It is finished. So this temporary halt, this in-between place, is a place where we rest and wait for God to come back, to restore all things, and to welcome us into the new heavens and the new earth, where we will enjoy an eternity with him, with resurrected, glorified bodies. Now, I also wish I could tell you more about what these resurrected, glorified bodies will be like. But once again, the Bible doesn't tell us a whole lot about it. So the best place for us to go is to Jesus, to go look at what was his resurrected body like. A theologian friend of mine named Matt described Jesus' resurrected body as transphysical. Now, I don't know if that term was original to him, but I don't know his source, so I'm gonna credit my buddy Matt with it. But here's what he meant when he said that. Jesus had a decidedly physical body. In fact, when he appeared to his disciples after his resurrection, he invited a guy named Thomas to come and touch the holes in his wrists and in his feet, and to feel the wound where he'd been speared in the side. He had a physical body, no doubt about it. And yet, Jesus also managed to appear in locked rooms. I'm not sure how he did that. I'm not sure how that works. And so that's why this word transphysical seems to make the most sense. That we will have physical bodies, but there's some way in which they will be differently physical than the ones we currently inhabit. Now, here's the point. We, like Jesus, will experience resurrection. If you trust and follow Jesus, you will experience resurrection. Because remember, God doesn't make junk, and he doesn't junk what he has made. He has plans to redeem and restore his good creation. And that includes your body. That includes your body. Now, I know this message has been far from linear. I know we have been hopping from passage to passage. We've looked at different myths. But I want to end our time together by looking at really the best news of heaven, the best part of heaven. And that's restored relationships. Restored relationships. We saw earlier that we were made in the image of God. We were made to represent and reflect him. And we do that in a lot of ways. Yes, we do that by caring for his good creation. Yes, we do that by engaging in meaningful and productive work. But one of the most important ways that we represent and reflect God is in relationship, because God is a decidedly relational God. The Bible describes God as one God who exists in three persons. Now, I cannot explain that to you. It makes my head hurt when I think about it. But it makes perfect sense to me that an infinite God would be bigger than my finite mind could imagine. The Bible is very clear, though. There's one God, and he exists in three persons. And so what that means is that before he ever created us, he was already in community. He was already in relationship within himself. So he didn't create us because he was lonely. He didn't create us because he needed friends. He wasn't lonely. He created us to love us. That's why you were made. You were created to be loved by your Creator. And we too were created in his image, made for relationship with him and with one another's. Now, I can't tell you the number of times that I've done damage to my relationship with God because of my sin. I can't tell you the number of times I have felt disconnected from him because of my sin. I can't wait for the day that I get to enjoy a restored relationship with him. I can't wait to be in his presence with no brokenness in the way. I long for that day. I can't wait to enjoy a perfect and whole relationship with him. And I can't wait to enjoy perfect and whole relationships with others. There's not a single person in my life that I have not sinned against. Not a single person, whether they realize it or not. There's not a single person in my life that I have not sinned against. I've been cutting and critical. I've been quick to get angry. I've withheld love and encouragement when I could have given it freely. I've been selfish. I have broken every one of my relationships, every single one. I don't deserve restored relationships. Not with God and not with anybody else. I don't deserve that. But that's what he promises. That's what he promises. He promises that everyone who accepts his gift of grace will enjoy an eternity in the presence of the one who loves them more than anyone else ever has or ever could. And he promises that we will enjoy restored relationships with one another. Heaven is amazing. Heaven is amazing. And here's the bottom line. You were made for it. You were made for eternity. This is what he always had in mind for you. This is what he always had in mind for you.